The night at Willow Creek Diner. The blood hit the linoleum before the thunder did. Thick, dark, and glistening under the flicker of a dying neon sign that read, Mabel's Place. Open late. Mabel Carter froze behind the counter, coffee pot trembling in her hand as the stranger collapsed against the doorframe. He was big, bearded, wearing a leather vest soaked in rain and blood. A roaring motorcycle engine faded somewhere down the wet road, followed by sirens cutting through the night like angry wolves. "Help me," he rasped, voice raw, eyes wild, gray eyes that looked both dangerous and scared, like a man running from his own grave. Mabel's body moved before her mind did. She yanked a towel from the counter and pressed it against his side. "You're bleeding bad," she said. He gave a weak grin, teeth red at the edges. "Ain't my best day, ma'am." The front door banged open so hard the chime flew off its hook. 2 police officers burst in, one tall and young, the other heavy-set with a gut that hung over his belt and eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. Their flashlights sliced through the dim diner, landing on the biker slumped on the floor. "There he is," the big one barked. "Step away, ma'am." "That man's under arrest." Mabel didn't move. Her heart hammered, but her hands stayed steady against the man's wound. "He needs a doctor," she said quietly. "He needs handcuffs," the officer snapped, grabbing her shoulder. She flinched but didn't back off. The younger one looked uneasy, like he wasn't sure what story he'd walked into. The older cop's jaw was tight, his tone reeking of something personal. "You don't know what this piece of trash did, lady. Step aside before you get yourself in trouble." Mabel lifted her chin, eyes steady. "I don't care what he did. I care that he's bleeding on my floor." A flash of lightning lit the diner in white for a split second. Her reflection in the chrome counter. The blood pooling, the fear in both men's faces. The older cop sneered. "You people always think you know better, huh?" Something cold and familiar crawled up Mabel's spine. That old tone she'd heard too many times in her life. She straightened her apron, her voice low but firm. "I said he's not going anywhere until he gets medical attention. You want to arrest someone, start with whoever put a hole in his side." The silence that followed was so sharp it felt like it could cut. The younger cop shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between his partner and Mabel. The older one leaned in close, his breath reeking of coffee and spite. "You just made yourself a mistake, lady." Mabel didn't blink. "Wouldn't be my first." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The sirens outside faded into the distance, swallowed by the rain. Finally, the older officer spat on the floor, muttered something about letting the dogs clean up their own mess, and turned for the door. His partner hesitated, then followed, giving Mabel a look that almost said sorry. When the door slammed shut, the diner felt like a church after a funeral. Quiet, heavy, holy somehow. Mabel exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She turned back to the man. His breathing was shallow, sweat glistening on his forehead. "You always pick fights with the police?" she asked, grabbing the first aid kit from under the counter. "Not usually," he groaned. "Just the corrupt ones." The name patch on his vest read Red Dalton. The back bore the flaming skull emblem of the Hells Angels. Mabel had heard stories about men like him. Rough, lawless, dangerous. But as she cleaned his wound and saw how his hands trembled, something in her softened. "You got somewhere safe to go?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "Nowhere but here, I guess." She hesitated, then said, "Then here'll have to do for tonight." Outside, thunder rolled again, distant, but growing closer. Mabel turned the diner's sign from open to closed, locked the door, and dimmed the lights. For a long while, neither spoke. Only the rain filled the silence, tapping against the glass like anxious fingers. When she finally met his eyes again, she saw something raw, not just pain, but shame, grief, and a strange kind of relief. And though she didn't know it yet, that one moment of mercy, a widow defending a wounded biker in a dying town, would bring 200 roaring engines to her door and change Willow Creek forever. The storm didn't let up that night. Rain hissed against the windows like a living thing trying to get in. Mabel kept glancing toward the door, half expecting the police to come back with backup. But all that came was the sound of thunder rolling through the hills. The diner lights glowed soft and golden, throwing long shadows over the booths and counter. The place had always felt safe to her. Her late husband, Henry, built it with his own hands, but tonight, It felt like she was standing in the eye of something much bigger. Red sat hunched at a corner booth, his cut-off vest folded beside him, bloodstains dark against the white towel she'd wrapped around his ribs. He'd eaten half a grilled cheese, barely tasting it, his eyes flicking toward the window every few minutes like a hunted animal. "You keep looking out there," Mabel said finally. "Ain't nobody coming." He smiled faintly. "You sure about that?" Mabel refilled his coffee cup, her hand steady now. "No, I'm not sure about anything anymore. But I do know the police ain't gonna bother me tonight. They got too much pride to admit they stormed into a diner and got told off by a 56-year-old woman with a dish towel." That made him chuckle, low and rough. "You got guts, lady." "I got experience," she said simply. "The world teaches you how to stand up when you got no one else left to do it for you." For a while they sat in silence. The old jukebox in the corner buzzed with static but never played. Red finally spoke again, voice quieter now, like he was talking to himself more than to her. "They said I broke a man's jaw in a bar up north," he began. "Said I smashed a pool cue over him for no reason. But what they don't say is that the man was the sheriff's boy. He was drunk, had his hand around a woman's throat, and I pulled him off her. Guess that ain't good manners in this county." Mabel watched him carefully. The story fit too well with the way those officers had stormed in. Not like cops doing their job, but like bullies defending their own. "You could have run farther than Willow Creek," she said. He shrugged. "Bike broke down 15 miles back. I was looking for a place to lay low till sunrise." She studied him for a moment. His face was rough but not cruel. Tired eyes, small scar over one eyebrow. The kind of face that had seen too many fights and too many mornings alone. "You got family?" she asked. He shook his head. "Used to. Not anymore." Mabel looked away. "Yeah, I know what that's like." The wind howled outside, rattling the diner door. A car passed on the highway, headlights cutting across the room and catching the edge of a framed photo. Mabel and Henry on opening day, both young, both smiling. Red followed her gaze. "That your husband?" She nodded softly. "Army man. Served 20 years, came home, built this place. Died 7 years ago. Heart just gave out one morning while he was fixing the porch steps." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He lived honest. He'd have liked you, I think." Red looked surprised. "Me, a biker with a record?" She smirked. Henry believed a man's record don't tell his story, just tells who's been writing it. He smiled at that, really smiled for the first time since he'd come in. Then his face changed. He went still, head cocked. "You hear that?" Mabel frowned. The rain had softened, but outside, over the sound of the wind, came the crunch of tires on gravel. Headlights flashed once, then cut off. Her stomach tightened. "You expecting company?" He shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am. That ain't my people." The two of them moved to the window. Out there, half hidden behind the rain, a dark pickup sat across the road with its engine idling. The same cruiser that had been there earlier was gone. This one had no lights, no markings. Just two silhouettes sitting inside, unmoving. Mabel felt a chill crawl up her spine. "They're watching." "Yeah," Red said softly. "And they ain't just watching me. They're watching you now, too." She turned to him, whispering fiercely. "Why would they?" He cut her off. "Because you made them look weak, ma'am. And men like that don't forget it." For a long moment, neither spoke. The air in the diner felt heavy, electric. Then Red straightened slowly, grimacing as he stood. "I'll go. No reason for you to get dragged into my mess." Mabel grabbed his arm, surprising even herself. "You step out that door, they'll kill you before you hit the road." Their eyes met, hers fierce, his haunted, and something passed between them. Not trust exactly, but something close enough to matter. Finally, she said, "You stay put till morning. If they want you, they can come through me." He opened his mouth to argue, but one look at her face shut him right up. He sank back into the booth, the rain drumming steady against the windows like a heartbeat. And in that tiny diner on the edge of nowhere, two people, a wounded biker and a widowed cook, began an uneasy alliance that would soon shake the whole town awake. Outside, the pickup's engine purred for another minute, then went silent. But Mabel knew better. The night wasn't done with them yet. By sunrise, the rain had thinned to a mist that clung to the windows like breath. Mabel poured herself a cup of black coffee, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear but from the kind of exhaustion that lives deeper than the bones. The man in her booth, the one they called Red Dalton, was still asleep, head resting on his folded arms. For the first time in years, she felt something in the diner other than silence. A pulse. A presence, a question she couldn't name. She moved quietly, cleaning up dishes that didn't need cleaning, her eyes flicking to the front window every few seconds. The unmarked pickup was gone, but 2 sets of tire tracks cut deep into the muddy shoulder. Whoever they were, they'd left before dawn, or gone to get reinforcements. When Red stirred awake, he looked calmer, like a man ready to move on. "You saved my hide last night," he said, voice rough from sleep. "Can't thank you enough." "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "This town don't forgive fast. They'll be back and they'll have questions." He nodded slowly. "Then I best be gone before they ask." But as he stood, she noticed something. A chain around his neck, half hidden under his shirt, with a rusted dog tag dangling from it. She frowned. "That military?" He hesitated. "Yeah, my brother's killed overseas. I wear it to remember." The way he said it, quiet, almost ashamed, tugged at something deep in her chest. Her late husband's tags were still hanging on the diner's wall behind the counter. "You were in service too?" she asked. He met her eyes. "I was, long time ago. Didn't end well." Before she could ask what he meant, the bell over the door jingled. The smell of damp coats and suspicion filled the room. It was Carla Jenkins, the town gossip, in a pink rain poncho and a mouth faster than her conscience. "Mabel Carter," Carla said, eyes darting toward Red. "I heard you had some kind of incident last night." Mabel's voice stayed calm. "You heard wrong." Carla leaned on the counter, lowering her voice but not her tone. "Folks saw police cars. Heard there was a fugitive here. You know how Sheriff Tate feels about strangers." "I know how Sheriff Tate feels about justice," Mabel said dryly. Carla gave her a look sharp enough to cut bread. "You be careful who you defend, Mabel. This ain't Atlanta. Folks around here don't take kindly to outsiders, especially not his kind." Red didn't move, just stared into his coffee. Mabel could feel his patience thinning, his pride rising like smoke. "Carla," she said softly, "I think your biscuits are burning at home." The woman stiffened. "You'll regret crossing Tate, you hear me?" When she left, the silence she left behind felt louder than the rain ever had. Red exhaled slowly. "Friendly bunch. Small towns," Mabel muttered. "They'll sell you pie and judgment in the same breath, but deep down..." She knew Carla was right about one thing. Word would spread faster than truth ever could. By afternoon, it had. Half the booths were empty by lunchtime. The men who usually came in for her famous catfish platter didn't show. The postman wouldn't meet her eye. Even Pastor Roy, who'd blessed the diner at its grand opening, drove past twice but never came in. That evening, Sheriff Tate himself appeared, hat low, boots muddy, face smug. He glanced at Red sitting quietly near the back. "Heard you got yourself a guest, Miss Carter." "Customer," she said evenly. Tate smirked. "Funny kind of customer, bleeding all over your floor in the middle of the night." Red's fists clenched under the table. Mabel stepped forward. "He came here for food, not trouble." "You're the one bringing that." Tate leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "You think you're doing the right thing, but you don't know what that man's capable of. You don't know what he did to his own brother." The words hit like cold steel. Mabel blinked. "His brother?" Tate smiled, eyes glinting. "Ask him sometime, before you end up another name folks whisper about." He tipped his hat and left, leaving the door swinging behind him. Mabel turned to Red, heart pounding. What did he mean? Red's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at the floor like it might swallow him. Then softly, "He's twisting it. My brother, he wasn't killed overseas. He killed himself. I was supposed to be with him that night, but I was too drunk to pick up the phone. Tate knows it, and he likes to use it when he wants to make me crawl." The confession hung in the air, raw and heavy. Mabel felt her anger shift, not at him, but at the way people like Tate fed on other people's pain. "You don't owe him your shame," she said quietly. He looked up, eyes wet but steady. "And you don't owe me your kindness." "Maybe not," she said, "but I'll give it anyway." That night, as she closed the diner early, Mabel noticed something strange. The same unmarked truck parked again by the highway, engine off, lights dead. But this time there were more, 2, maybe 3 vehicles, silhouettes barely visible through the fog. They weren't done watching. And as she turned off the lights, Mabel had the cold, Crawling sensed that the storm hadn't passed at all. It had just changed shape. The next morning came gray and uneasy, the kind of morning that carried bad news before the radio did. Mabel woke before the sun, made coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and stepped outside to sweep the porch. The road was empty, but the air felt wrong, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Her diner, once a place of warmth and laughter, now stood as a quiet island of tension in the middle of town. Windows from across the street stayed shuttered. A newspaper lay crumpled on her doorstep with a headline that made her blood run cold. Local diner owner, harbors fugitive. Police investigate. She didn't need to read the rest. Sheriff Tate had moved faster than she expected. Her heart thudded in her chest, not from guilt but from rage. Inside, Red sat at the counter, his breakfast untouched. He'd seen the paper too. "Guess I'm poisoned now," he muttered. "You and me both," she said. He looked at her, something heavy in his eyes. "I can fix this, Mabel. I just need to talk to my people. Once they know I'm alive, they'll clear me. But I can't call them. They'll trace it." "Then you don't call," she said firmly. "You wait. Let them come to you," he frowned. "You sure about that?" Before she could answer, the door opened with the slow creak of trouble. 2 uniformed officers stepped in, not the ones from before. These were younger, cleaner, pretending politeness like it was armor. "Mornin', Miss Carter," one said, removing his hat. "Sheriff sent us to ask a few questions." "Ask away," she replied, though her hand tightened around the rag she was holding. They looked at Red. "You the man goes by Jake Dalton?" "Red Dalton," he corrected, calm but alert. The second officer's tone cooled. "We've got reports you assaulted a deputy and fled the scene." "Mind telling us why?" "Because the deputy's son was strangling a woman," Red said. "I stopped him. Guess that makes me the villain now." The first officer's jaw tightened, and Mabel saw something flicker in his eyes, a flash of truth he wasn't allowed to say. The other officer didn't like that answer. "You got proof of that?" Red's silence said it all. Mabel stepped forward. "I do. The woman he saved was here last week, Marcy Danner. She works at the gas station in Jasper. You go ask her yourself." The officers exchanged a glance. One scribbled something in his notepad, but the other shook his head. "Sheriff says we bring him in. That's the order." "Then you tell your sheriff," Mabel said coldly, "that he can come get him himself." The tension hung thick in the air. The officers hesitated, then left, muttering something about warrants. As the door closed, Mabel turned to Red. "We're running out of time." He nodded grimly. "And when time runs out in my world, people start dying." Hours later, just as the sun began to dip behind the pine trees, the sound came, first faint, then swelling into a roar that rattled the diner's glass. Engines, dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Mabel rushed to the window. Down the highway, a river of motorcycles appeared, headlights blazing like a swarm of fireflies, exhaust echoing off the hills. The townspeople poured out of their homes, watching in disbelief as the convoy rolled into Willow Creek. 200 bikers. Chrome, leather, and thunder. They filled the lot in front of her diner, parking in perfect lines. The noise was deafening until all at once every engine cut off. The silence afterward felt heavier than the sound itself. Red stood, shoulders squared. "My people," he said quietly. Mabel's throat went dry. "All of them?" "Not all," he said. "Just the ones who heard what you did." The door swung open, and in walked a tall, silver-bearded man with eyes sharp as steel, and a jacket marked with the same flaming skull as Red's. He looked around, nodded once, and said, "Which one's Mabel Carter?" Mabel raised a cautious hand. He smiled faintly. "Ma'am, you stood up for one of ours. That don't go unnoticed. You're under our protection now." She blinked, stunned. "Protection from who?" He glanced toward the sheriff's office across the street. "From anyone stupid enough to think they can scare you." Before she could respond, another sound cut through the moment. Sirens, wailing closer, louder. Police cruisers flooded the street, lights flashing red and blue over the sea of leather jackets and steel. Sheriff Tate himself stepped out, face red with fury. "This ends now," he shouted. "These men are trespassing. This is a riot." The silver-bearded biker, Hawk, Red whispered, stepped forward. "Ain't no riot, Sheriff. Just breakfast." The crowd laughed, low and dangerous. Tate's hand went to his holster. "You think you can intimidate me?" Mabel's voice sliced through the air. You did enough intimidating last night, Sheriff. Now it's your turn to listen. Tate glared at her. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, woman. But before he could take another step, a biker near the front pulled out his phone and held it high. Got the whole thing on video, he said. The beating, the threats, the lies. World's gonna see exactly who you are. The sheriff froze. Mabel stared, realization dawning like sunrise. This wasn't just protection, it was revelation. And as the engines rumbled back to life, she understood. The storm that began with one wounded man was about to tear Willow Creek apart. The roar of the bikes swallowed the sheriff's words, shaking the diner windows as the first cracks of real change thundered through the town. Then, just before the engines faded, Red turned to her, eyes burning. This ain't over, Mabel, it's just begun. The town of Willow Creek had never seen anything like it. 200 bikers lining Main Street, chrome gleaming under the afternoon sun, police cars blocking the intersections, and the whole town watching from behind curtains and camera phones. The diner that once smelled of coffee and apple pie now carried the thick scent of gasoline and fear. Inside, Mabel stood behind the counter, her hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles ached. Outside, the tension hung like thunder before a storm. Red sat in his usual booth, the weight of everything pressing on him, his past, his choices, and the woman who had risked everything to help him. You still got time to walk away, he said softly. She shook her head. Not when they're turning this place into a battlefield over a lie. He studied her face. You remind me of my mom. Tough as nails, heart too big for her own good. Then she raised you right, Mabel said, forcing a faint smile. But her stomach twisted. The sheriff's warning still echoed in her head. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into. Through the window, she could see Sheriff Tate talking to his deputies, his face flushed with fury. Then a sleek black car pulled up behind his cruiser. Out stepped a man in a gray suit, polished shoes, and a badge clipped to his belt. The kind of man who didn't belong in Willow Creek. Calm, precise, dangerous, and silence. FBI, Red muttered. Guess they're serious now. Mabel's heart skipped. FBI, for what? He sighed. For me, maybe. Or maybe for what Tate's been hiding. The man in the suit entered the diner, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Carter? Yes, sir. I'm Special Agent Cole. Mind if I ask you and Mr. Dalton a few questions? She nodded, leading him to a booth. The hum of engines outside vibrated through the floor as he opened a folder. Inside were photos, grainy stills of the bar fight, police reports, and a document stamped confidential. Jake Dalton, Cole said, using Red's real name. You're wanted for questioning in a case involving Deputy Tyler Tate, the sheriff's son. Red's jaw clenched. I told you I stopped him from hurting that woman. Cole nodded slowly. We know. We've got witness statements confirming that. Problem is, the sheriff filed false reports to cover it up. He's been under federal investigation for 2 years. Bribery, obstruction, and assault. Mabel's eyes widened. You're saying he framed Red to protect his son? Cole looked at her, voice steady. I'm saying he's been framing a lot of people. But what you did last night changed things. The footage that surfaced this morning, of Tate threatening you, of your defense of Dalton, went viral. People are watching now. Red frowned. Footage? What footage? Cole tilted his head toward the window, where one of the bikers stood holding up his phone, streaming the scene live. Your friends have quite the network, he said dryly. Half the state's tuned in. Mabel's knees nearly gave out. The thought of the world seeing her diner, her stand, her face, it was overwhelming. But deep down, a spark of pride lit inside her chest. So what happens now? She asked. Cole leaned back. Now we need proof of Tate's corruption. We've got his son's record sealed, but nothing concrete on the sheriff. If we can find the original bar security footage, we can clear Dalton and put Tate away for good. Red nodded. That footage was on the bar's camera. Tate probably took it. Mabel stepped forward. Then it's in his office. Cole met her gaze. You're not thinking what I think you're thinking. She crossed her arms. You need proof. I've got the keys to the back alley. The sheriff won't let you near his office, but he's sure as hell keeping an eye on me. I'll be the distraction. You get what you need. Red stood up sharply. No, you've done enough, but Mabel's eyes hardened. You said once that standing up's the only thing that matters. Well, I'm standing. Outside, the bikers revved their engines like thunder, answering her resolve. Cole gave a reluctant nod. All right, Mrs. Carter, but if this goes wrong... It won't, she said, though her voice trembled slightly. It can't. Dusk settled over Willow Creek as the plan unfolded. Cole slipped out the back toward the sheriff's office, Red following close. Mabel stepped onto the porch, hands steady, eyes fixed on Tate, who stood across the street watching her with cold suspicion. "Well, Sheriff?" she called, her voice carrying through the heavy air. "You wanted me out here, didn't you?" "Let's talk," he smiled thinly. "About what?" "About truth," she said, as they faced off, headlights from the parked bikes threw long shadows behind them, stretching across the street like silent witnesses. Inside the sheriff's office, Red and Cole crept through the dark, searching drawers, files, the locked cabinet near the desk. Then Red froze. Found it. The small flash drive gleamed under the beam of his flashlight. But before they could move, the office door burst open. Tate's deputies flooded in, guns raised. Back at the diner, Mabel heard the shouting. Then a gunshot cracked the night wide open. She dropped the coffee mug she was holding, porcelain shattering on the porch steps. "Red?" she screamed, and as the echo faded into the thick southern dusk, the engines roared to life once more, 200 thunderous hearts answering her cry. The night of reckoning had come to Willow Creek. The gunshot shattered the night like glass. For one awful second, everything in Willow Creek froze. No sirens, no engines, no breath. Just silence. Then the world roared back to life. Bikers surged toward the sheriff's office. Mabel ran barefoot across the wet pavement, apron still tied around her waist, heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Inside the small brick building, smoke hung thick in the air. A desk overturned, papers scattered, a broken picture frame face down. She found Red on the floor, bleeding from a graze across his arm but alive, leaning against the wall. "I'm fine," he gasped, clutching the flash drive in his hand. They got Tate. Sheriff Tate lay sprawled by his desk, his gun on the floor beside him, eyes glassy with shock. His own deputy was standing over him, shaking, the pistol still trembling in his grip. He fired first," the young man stammered. "He tried to shoot the agent." Cole, the FBI man, stood in the corner, calm but pale. "It's over," he said softly. Mabel felt her knees weaken. She pressed a hand to her chest, staring at Tate, the man who'd ruled this town through fear and lies for years. Now small, broken, mortal. She didn't feel triumph. She just felt tired. "Let's get you out of here," Cole said to Red. "We have what we need." Minutes later, the diner lights burned bright again, the only warm place in the whole town. Red sat at the counter, arm bandaged, the flash drive sitting between them. Cole uploaded the footage onto his laptop, the screen flickering to life. Grainy video from that bar weeks ago. There it was, Tate's son, drunk, cornering a terrified woman. Red stepping in, pulling him back. The deputy's son throwing the first punch, then the fight. Brutal, chaotic, but clear. Red hadn't attacked him. He'd stopped him. Cole exhaled. "That's enough to clear you and bury the sheriff's reputation for good." Mabel watched in silence as the truth played across the screen. When it ended, she looked at Red. "You did what was right and they made you pay for it." He met her eyes. "So did you." Outside, the bikers waited quietly, their engines off, the night wind carrying the scent of oil and pine. For the first time, the air didn't feel like fear. It felt like freedom. Cole packed up his files. "We'll handle the rest from here," he said. "You'll be free to go, Mr. Dalton, but you might want to keep a low profile until the dust settles." Red nodded. "Been keeping low my whole life." When the agent left, Mabel poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Red. "So what now?" she asked. He stared into the dark liquid. "Now I ride." "That's what I know," she smiled faintly. "And I cook. Guess we both go back to what we are." But before he stood, he reached into his vest and pulled out something. A patch, black and red, the symbol of his club. He slid it across the counter to her. Embroidered across the top were the words, "To Mabel, the Angel of Willow Creek." Her throat tightened. "I can't take this." "Yeah, you can," he said. "You earned it. You stood up when nobody else would. You didn't save just me, Mabel. You saved a whole town from forgetting what right looks like." Tears welled up, but she blinked them away. "You men ride hard and live loud," she whispered. "But I never saw more honor than what I saw this week." He grinned. "Don't get soft on us, Angel." She laughed then, the first real laugh in months. It filled the diner, warm and human. Outside, dawn began to bleed into the sky, painting the clouds pink and gold. When Red finally stepped outside, the bikers started their engines one by one. The sound rolled across the town like distant thunder, not threatening anymore, just alive. As they pulled out onto the highway, Mabel stood in the doorway, arms folded, wind tugging at her hair. Red turned once, his bike idling at the edge of the lot. He lifted 2 fingers to his brow in a small salute, and she nodded back, her heart both heavy and light. Then he twisted the throttle and disappeared into the sunrise, engines fading into the distance like fading echoes of courage. By noon, reporters and townsfolk crowded outside the diner. The news was out. Sheriff Tate's corruption, the false charges, the woman he tried to silence. The town that had once turned its back on Mabel now lined up at her door, not for food but to shake her hand. Weeks later, the diner walls bore new pictures, one of Henry in uniform, one of Red and the bikers smiling out front, and in the center, the framed patch, the angel of Willow Creek. Sometimes at closing, Mabel would sit by the window, cup of coffee in hand, staring at the highway that stretched beyond the hills. The memories still hurt, but not the way they used to. They were softer now, the ache that comes when pain finally makes peace with purpose. She thought about Red, about the night that changed everything, and about the strange way life works, how help comes from the most unexpected places, and how justice sometimes wears a leather jacket instead of a badge. As the last bit of daylight faded, she whispered to the empty diner, her voice calm, steady, certain. Sometimes angels don't come with wings. Sometimes they ride Harleys. And with that, Mabel turned the sign to closed, smiled to herself, and let the quiet hum of the open road carry her heart somewhere free.